Tech is allowing us to be connected to people around the world. Are we ready to embrace that diversity?
One of the things that makes me nervous about the category of tech for good is as soon as you put something in a box, people can say, that's a box I'm not interested in.
We have to ask people questions, avoid making assumptions, and never ask people what's the tech that they want. You always ask them what's the problem that they're experiencing.
Welcome to the QT podcast. This show is where queer tech professionals, entrepreneurs, and leaders come together to share insights, challenges, and success because queer innovators deserve the mic. I'm your host, Napal Testoni. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of QueerTech. This season, supported by the Canadian Media Fund, we're taking you straight to the 2024 QT conference stage. From breaking systematic barriers and using tech for good to scaling businesses and creating wealth, these episodes bring you unfiltered discussions from industry leaders on the most pressing challenges and opportunities facing our community. On today's episode, we're bringing you the QTQ 2024 session, Tech for Good, Harnessing Technology for Positive Social Impact, where Anis Heydari, senior business reporter at CBC News, led a conversation on how technology can be a powerful force for social change and community empowerment. Our panelists included Elisa Schaeffer, Dean of Technology at Collège LaSalle, Alejandro Mayoral Banos, Executive Director at Access Now, Elisa Gibson, President and founder of Ignite Communication Inc., and Siri Agrell, CEO of BetaKit. Each panelist offered powerful insights on the role of inclusive leadership and ethical innovation in addressing global challenges. Let's get started.
I'm Anis Heydari. I'm a business reporter with the CBC. I'm really thrilled to be here with such an illustrious panel. We're going to be talking about what is, I think, a little bit more timely today than maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's omnipresent in a lot of our discussions, and it's the idea of using technology for positive social impacts and for making some good in the world. Rather than me introducing all of our panelists, I'm going to have them introduce themselves and maybe define what they think tech for good is. And I will start with Lisa first.
So I'm Lisa, president and founder of Ignite Communications. I'm also the acting president right now of QueerTech. And prior to starting my own business about a year ago, I worked at Microsoft. And so my definition of tech for good is really Microsoft informed. And so for me, it's about technology that's trying to solve a societal or a community issue. So starting with a challenge or a problem or something you want to solve, and then building a technology solution that addresses it.
Okay, see, my natural inclination is to now ask you a follow-up question, but instead I'm going to say thanks and head over to Alejandro.
My name is Alejandro Mayoral. I'm the executive director of Access Now. It's a global organization working with human rights defenders and in protecting against digital threats. I'm the founder also of two non-for-profits, one in Canada and one in the US, Indigenous Friends Association and Mactayani in Mexico, working with a lot of indigenous communities around digital spaces. How define tech for good? Oh my God, I can talk for hours, but in a nutshell, I think it's, of course, when tech is used in a way that supports activists and supports human rights defenders in a way that embraces the humanity, that embraces the human aspect. I think we forget so many times that technology is for humans and not the other way around. So that's how I always talk to my teams about how we need to approach technology, especially in this era.
Thank you. I'm definitely coming back to that one.
Hi, everybody. My name is Siri Agrell. Siri, like the iPhone, unfortunately. I am the CEO of BetaKit. BetaKit is a publication focused on the Canadian technology and innovation sectors. We believe that storytelling and journalism is an essential part of building strong leaders, strong companies, and strong sectors. My answer is related to storytelling. I think sometimes we get the story of tech wrong, and I think especially recently, the story of technology has become about how much money can you raise, how much can you sell your company for, how much data can you extract from people, where really tech is a tool that is, has profound capacity to have positive societal impacts beyond enrichment and convenience. And so I think tech for good for me is anything that has an uplift for the greater good and for collective interest.
Okay. Last but definitely not least, I would love to hear more about Elisa.
Hi, I'm Elisa Schaeffer. I'm the Dean of Technology at Collège LaSalle, Montréal. I'm a Finnish computer scientist. And like Siri was saying, I think tech is for good whenever it's improving something that isn't monetary. Using something to make the everyday person's life better, doing reasonable data analysis or technology implementation to just make cities run smoother, schools be better, hospitals be better, prisons be less miserable, instead of churning money or shareholder value for someone. And recently I've gotten more focused on the invisible harmful side effects on technology, like how much extra energy do we spend just when we send an email because we decided to attach a company logo, or because we chose a font that no one ever optimized. So even when the use is good or neutral, the way in which we use technology may be harming the planet.
I hadn't even thought of that. I sent so many attachments and I feel terrible.
Honestly, you said that and I'm like, oh, I should double check my font use now. Let's start by talking a little bit about some of the both intended and unintended side effects that you all have really hinted on. And so, Alejandro, I'm going to start with you. When we're talking about how to use tech for good, you mentioned what you say to your teams. And we have a lot of people in this room who are either going to be leaders, are currently leaders, or want to be a part of a team and want to look for qualities in their leader. But how do you find that you can direct inclusivity and positive social impact through what you do with your teams and the people that you're trying to motivate to do that work?
Oh, perfect. I have a great example. And especially we're in a queer conference, so I think people know what Grindr is. And when I started my job working with human rights defenders, I was like, okay, how this is going to be related to the work? Of course, we think Grindr as a dating app. However, in my daily job, what I discover, this is a safety issue in many other countries. In a lot of African countries, because the geolocation, this becomes a real issue for a lot of queer people. So it was a very interesting conversation with my team to start having this different perspective from something like Grindr. How we think about Grindr here is very different than how we think about Grindr in an African country. And we had a very interesting conversation how we need to embrace these differences and how it's so important to start creating that space, that safer space, never safe, but at least safer space to have those uncomfortable conversations. One interesting aspect of this conversation is that now we have an allyship with Grindr, that every time that a human rights defender acts on Grindr, that because there is a threat or they see an unusual use of the app, Grindr blocks the user. And we have a very, very close conversation with them in how we can increase the safety of the app. And this is happening with other big tech companies as well, with Meta, with Google, with Microsoft as well, how we can continue doing this. But in order to do that, we need to have this uncomfortable conversation, how we are understanding tech and how we are bringing humanity into tech. And sometimes it's very different from the approaches that we think we have.
Elisa, when you're in your position as an academic and as an instructor, how do you impart that to the people that you're working with and seeing at the college before they're in the industry, or maybe when they're nascent and they're just starting to grow? Because it sounds, we're talking a lot about almost, diversity in thought and in staffing, bringing these unintended consequences that I would see as unintended to the surface, and so from an academic perspective, how do you develop that and bring that to the forefront?
It's happening at a lot of different levels. One of the things that is a constant fight is purging kind of ancient, weird, gendered language from policies and documents, The student, he learns, the teacher, he evaluates, and I'm like, well, there's too many dicks on the dance floor, we're not supposed to be doing this anymore. But it's a really difficult thing to clean out academic language, to not assume any genders. Then comes all the case studies. There's now across Canada, a lot of interest to decolonize the curriculum, to move towards examples and case studies and scenarios that wouldn't be kind of like based in the usual academic examples that tend to be very Western, tend to be very male, and tend to be rather straight. So we need to clean out the policies, we need to clean out the curriculum, and then there's all of the administrative stuff. Fighting the government on what name goes on the diploma. Can the student choose the name that they want to be referred to in the classroom setting if all communications are limited to using the name the government wants it on the diploma? So we're doing a whole lot of things where the information system is part of the problem, but the rooted regulation of academia slows it down tremendously.
We've been running into that in my own work. I'm also a union rep with the CBC's Guild, and we're trying to translate, not from English to French, well, yes, from English to French, but we're trying to translate our current collective agreement to make it gender neutral. And it's an important initiative, but it's time consuming. And it frames the way that people speak about our workplace and the things that we do at our workplace. And I mean, I work with tech, but not everyone does. That language can really shape how we're interacting with the things that are all around us. So I'm going to talk to the other journalist now. Siri, how do you think that you can harness the approaches that we're talking about here when you're communicating both with the tech sector, but also BetaKit speaks to, you know, the people in this room and to the outside world. So how important is it to harness everything that we're hearing about in how you speak?
I'm of two minds about it, right? I really do think it comes down to storytelling and engaging people in the why of things, right? Why is this important? Sometimes I think the best why is to find their own selfish motivation to do things, which I feel bad about sometimes, right? It shouldn't be about you, it should be about bettering the lives of others. But I do find that specifically in the tech sector, trying to get people to do things because it's good for people is not always a winning strategy, unfortunately. It's not that anybody wants to do harm. I don't think anyone starts out doing harm. It's not their incentive structure. And so I do think that when you think about how to calibrate the why, you have to think, what are the incentive structures that I'm up against? What are people looking at, right? So tech, the VC market is like, well, we're about the Benjamins, as my kids would say, right? Like, we're about making money. How do you incentivize for that? How do you say, you're missing out on market share when you do things like this? You're alienating your customer base when you structure it like this, right? I don't think you should always do that. I'm not saying you should couch the very real negative impacts on that, but I do think that calibrating language, you want to find a way in that people are actually going to engage. One of the things that makes me nervous about the category of tech for good is as soon as you put something in a box, people can say, that's a box I'm not interested in. My investment philosophy is not about tech for good, so I'm going to ignore that, right? So I do think that it's important to gauge your audience. Like, one of the best pieces of communication advice I ever got is like, it's about performance, right? It's about eliciting a response in your audience. It's not about how smart you are or what you're saying. It's like, are they listening or are they on their phone? I'm just kidding. Are they going to get up and do something different? I know, I'm just teasing. So it's constantly about, am I getting through, right? Are they getting it? Are they thinking about it differently? What is the story where you're like, God, I never thought about what the experience could be like from safety in that app, right? We will change that. I've never thought that this is a barrier to enrollment in a time when post-secondary should be really focusing on getting people to go, right? Like, is that a barrier that I can remove? So it's that sort of calibration for me.
I'm going to pivot a little bit from my notes here, and I'm also on my phone, so sorry if I made anyone feel bad there with my heckling. One of the things you mentioned was, you know, investors maybe not wanting their money to go in a specific box, and it did make me think about what has become a buzzword in some mainstream investment channels, ESG investment, you know, environmental and social good. And there are investors and market movers who are like, I'm not interested in that. No, thank you. Before they've even looked at what's in that box, so to speak. So I'm going to toss this out to everyone, but I will start with Lisa. Do you think that it is fair to correlate tech being for good with being inside of a box like that? Or should we be assuming that every aspect of tech needs to be doing capital G good?
I mean, I think that's an interesting conversation. When I think about investments, and again, because I come from the Microsoft world, part of the reason it's in a box is because there's specific programs and funds from large industry organizations like Google, like Amazon, like Microsoft, that actually want to direct funds there. So it kind of serves a bit of a purpose from that perspective, and it makes it easy for people to find out how do you apply for a grant. But on the flip side, I hear what you're saying about, I think it's all about impact. And so I feel like as you go out to investors, and then we go back to the storytelling question, I think it's about how you tell the impact story and how you can position it to investors so that it's not just a tick the box of doing an ESG thing, that it's, and something they're going to shy away from, but it's actually really demonstrating the impact on a whole community and a society. And where I've seen it really work well is when it's not the company that's talking about the product, the story, it's actually the people that are getting impacted. So it's the real emotional connection to whatever the Tech for Good initiatives. I think keeping it in a box serves a purpose from some perspectives in terms of creating a whole program and a whole movement, but I do also see some of the limiting factors that you just identified.
There's this idea that you need to have not just maybe the people who are making or working with the product, but community engagement to have it be relevant and to bring out some of that social impact. I don't want to just put out there like, let's talk about what makes something relevant to a community and what motivates them to come out and engage publicly or within their own community, but engage with a product or a service that's been developed by the tech sector. So I don't want to just be like, let's discuss communities. But I can see, Alejandro, you want to pipe in.
Yeah,
so
no,
discuss.
There is an important point that I want to highlight and base on the interventions. I think when we are talking about tech for good, we have this savior mentality that, oh, we're going to solve all the problems. We need to make an assessment, and from civil society, but also from the companies. What is the problem that we want to tackle? We are not going to save the world, and we're not going to save the world from Canada, saving all the children in African countries. We need to make this assessment, and especially because we can create harm. And this is a lot of the things that actually were highlighted with Tech for Good. Sometimes we have very good intentions. We don't do these assessments in time and actually to start planning really what is going to be our impact in the long term. And also when we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, are we ready to have that conversation? Tech is allowing us to be connected to people around the world. Are we ready to embrace that diversity? Because it's not just about having different people around the world. Are we ready to accommodate the challenges that we are bringing into our organization, into our company? This is something that I'm actually facing, and it's a very interesting conversation that I'm having inside my organization. We have people across the globe, in Tunisia, in Lebanon, in Myanmar, in many different countries that, of course, are facing a lot of issues. So how we can accommodate all these different challenges at the same time that we have people in the US really stressed out with the election yesterday. So you can see these different angles. So it's so important that when we bring this idea of tech for good and this diversity, equity, and inclusion, we make an assessment about if we are ready to embrace that change.
Hey QT, did you know QueerTech is more than just this award-winning podcast? We offer 3 cohort-style programs to help you build your career in tech. QT Access helps US LGBTQIA+ professionals break into tech. QT Leaders empowers experienced professionals to advance their careers, and QT Founders is a startup accelerator to early first-time queer entrepreneurs. We also host quarterly QT Connects meetup in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, and Halifax. And don't forget QT Cubes, Canada's largest US LGBTQI+ tech conference. Ready to plug in? Join our community today at QueerTech.org. Okay, back to the show now.
I'm interested in the concept of being ready or not ready, because I think, and I don't want to give too much of my own opinion here, but I think often in the tech sector, whether we're talking to a group of people in the QueerTech world or, any sort of subgroup, people assume that they're often ready for what's coming. I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but I would love to know what examples are of where the circles you're in or what you've observed in tech. Maybe it's not your direct circle. Where have we not been ready? And if you don't have an example, I'll give you a pass. That's okay, but I'd like to start with Elisa.
I've actually seen kind of like in the last few years a lot of people waking up to the economic disparities and kind of the climate change situation, that those of us who used to kind of be on the tech bro train are very purposefully jumping out of it because we don't want to replace workers by robots. We don't want to go to Mars. We don't want to desalinate the oceans because we'd kind of like to preserve the rest of the system. So there's more people that are now actively saying no, especially with Gen AI, that we're more than doing tech for good, we're trying to put the brakes on tech that's very obviously not for good and very obviously in the benefits of the few. And I would say that any climate change combating technology, any disaster relief, any first warning systems are gaining the kind of attention of people who would have been developing new AI, except that now we can't sleep at night if we do, so we'd rather do things instead. I've seen a lot of very cool projects from Google with deforestation, food safety, education of people in rural areas that have, let's say, under-benefited from the present status quo. And I think in that sense, all this like carbon offset stuff is kind of working. The carbon offsets actually don't work. But the idea is that if you're doing tech that's questionable, but it pushes your organization to also invest in actual social good in something that isn't a Western urban area, it's a little win. And the little Luddites in every computer scientist will eventually push us more to being in the community instead of being at Wall Street.
So I'm hearing then that maybe sometimes when there is a gap, it can be at least a good bridge, if not enough on its own, to, okay, I'm doing X, and X has a negative consequence, but it's pushing me to also do Y, so there's a net good? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
We're feeling guilty enough, we're finally feeling guilty enough to be pushed to actively seek out where we can help.
We haven't been ready for any of it, but that's fine. That's what innovation and evolution is about. I think the biggest failure has been of government and regulatory bodies to respond, right? We weren't ready for cars. We didn't realize when we had cars that suddenly there would be car accidents. But then we very suddenly realized that we should add seatbelts, right? We haven't added any seatbelts. We haven't adapted, I think, our responses to any of this. I've worked in government too, and I remember having a conversation with the head of the city government about tech, and he's like, I don't know anything about tech, so I'm not going to engage there. I'm like, you don't know anything about building a swimming pool either, but you know if someone's drowning in it, you would put up a fence, right? Like, it's a weird thing that we're intimidated by the innovation and how to manage it, and so I think it's a failure of response.
I think that's an interesting point, and I suspect there's a lot of people in this room who run into like, oh, that's on a computer. Response from people that they're trying to interact with, even though there are consequences that extend far outside of whatever technology that you're working with directly. I want to pull on that thread a little bit more, because when we're talking about positive social impact, it has to extend outside of whatever ecosystem we happen to be living and working in. Elisa, you got a lot of background in communications. I feel like you in particular would have to have been translating, whether it's for work or for your personal life and the circles that you're in, tech for the broader audiences. How do you do that while still maintaining a drive to have people get on board the train to positive social change? Like, is it just about, I don't want to use the term simplifying or dumbing it down, but like, I also have to work in this world in broadcast. How much of a barrier, maybe, is what I want to ask. How much of a barrier is the like, oof, that's on a computer that Siri was talking about? to the
Yeah,
current
I mean, I think the
change we want?
reality is when you were talking about ready, I think you get different levels of ready, and you get different levels of knowledge of technology and what it means. And obviously, my background, I've worked in PR a very long time. I've worked with lots of your colleagues and so on. And whether it's working with media, whether it's working with your employees, whether it's social media followers, you get a wide range of people's understanding of technology. And so, and the impact that it can have. And so, you use the word simplify, but it's kind of true, because I feel like, especially if you're in the tech industry, you can have a bit of a propensity to get really technical with things and to not actually explain it in a way that people can really grasp and get on board with. Like, the way to rally people together around social impact and to see the change that's happening is to actually explain it in a way they understand. But I actually go back to what I said earlier, which is I think having somebody who's been impacted actually share their impact goes much further than if you're in a tech industry and you're trying to talk about a product or a service. It's actually more about the impact, the emotional connection, and again, it's around the storytelling. And I also just think from an industry perspective, I also think if you have a reputation for talking about the good and the bad, about being authentic and transparent, in good times and in bad, I think more people will listen to you and buy in with what you're saying. If you only show up to talk about the good things and the good things you're doing, and you shy away from talking about the challenges and the risks, then I think people don't actually give you the credibility.
Go ahead, Alejandro.
I have a perfect example of what you just said, and it's a very visual example. In my previous organization, we were working with several countries in South America, working around the Amazon rainforest. So as you know, there is a lot of fires happening across the Amazon right now with climate change. And one of the big solutions that the governments wanted to implement was a data system. Data system to actually have live information about the fires in the Amazon. So basically, they were working with a lot of local governments and a lot of national governments in order to put all that information up and live, available for everyone. Of course, sounded as a great project, but didn't hear all the communities, all the stakeholders that are involved in this. So what was one of the actually consequences of this? A lot of indigenous communities were not heard, and they were not part of the process. What is happening is that this information commonly is helping mining companies and a lot of logging companies actually to continue extracting natural resources from the ground. Because actually you are telling me what are the spots where the fires are coming in, and actually the levels of education in every single state and region of indigenous communities. So I can offer school, I can offer infrastructure in order to have the indigenous community to agree with my policy, with whatever I want to do. So a lot of indigenous communities were against completely of this approach. And suddenly it was like, oh, indigenous peoples are against climate change. And it's like, no, it's just that it's a matter of listening to all the people that are part of the solution and understanding that always tech is going to have consequences. And it's understanding that, yes, sometimes with good intentions is not enough. We need to make the proper assessment and take the proper time in order to start creating the solutions.
It sounds like one of the challenges that you're talking about there actually dovetails into one of the points we wanted to talk about, which is how you build partnerships with different groups in different communities. I keep using the word ecosystem. I suppose it's a little bit jargony, but we don't exist in bubbles amongst ourselves. We are all a part of different communities. A lot of them are represented in this room. We hear a little bit there about some of the consequences when you miss some of those connections at first and then having to build them. But how or can you be intentional in the first place as you're developing your product, as you're developing your business or your work? Elisa, I'll start with you. Are there ways to be collaborative and build partnerships with other groups in the first place? What's been your experience there?
I would say we have to ask people questions, avoid making assumptions, and never ask people what's the tech that they want. You always ask them what's the problem that they're experiencing. Because if you just arrive with your hardware and software and try to find a way to make it fit, that's not gonna work. And ideally, you would listen to the community members, maybe even more than the community leaders. There has to be authentic observation and a real human connection. So you don't just go installing some sensors no one wants that are never going to be maintained. No one's ever going to pick them up. I've seen too many tech projects where you roll into a school in an underprivileged area, you install something, you inaugurate, everybody claps, the major takes a photo, you leave, and 3 years later no one has any idea on how to do anything because the batteries are out, there's no service agreement, there was never any training. We're too eager to just give robots to kids and leave it at that.
I mean, I totally wanted a robot when I was a kid, but it's a very good point. I think, honestly, it applies even in day-to-day work. As you're describing that, I'm cringing thinking about some of the ways we've deployed technology at my own work and maybe not always equipped people to use the tools and not thought about what's the problem you have. And we've just said, what would you like me to buy? I think that's something everyone in this room should really be thinking about. But when you talk about making sure that you're engaging with community members and not just community leaders, that can often be a challenge. It can be hard to locate those people. And so I'll just sort of put it out to the panel, because I think we would all have very different perspectives on how you find the right people to talk to. Lisa, I'll start with you if you have thoughts on that. And if you don't, that's okay. It's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think I've just been in a good position where the people have found us. So I think from, when you're talking about good partnerships, I think it's actually, number one, like you said, starting with what the problem is. But then I think it's about bringing different organizations and or people that have different skill sets that you're all working together, right? So if you're working with like an organization that, understands its members deeply and can share that with the tech company that then's building the solution. And so maybe that, the people in the community don't actually have obviously tech background. We may not have insights deep into the community, so we need to lean on each other to share that expertise. So I think you need to bring together people with different competencies and different backgrounds and leverage the capabilities of each other.
Alejandro, I know you have thoughts on this.
I have tons of examples of failed technologies and how actually communities were not consulted. But just going back to your question, I think to be open to the actors or the stakeholders that are going to be maybe against your solution and being open to have that uncomfortable conversation. Sometimes we want to embrace, the users, the clients that we know that they are going to be hyped with the technology, but are we willing to hear the people that are going to be affected by our technology? Commonly, that's not the case. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, because sometimes, and this, I have several examples that I can share with everyone, about when community clearly said, no, we don't need the technology. We don't need the digital tech solution. We need something completely different. Are we willing to have that as an answer? And I think sometimes it's very difficult for us because, of course, we have stakeholders, we have investors, but I think this is part of the tech for good conversation that we need to have.
I think that we have a tendency, especially in Canada, to kind of governance ourselves to death on partnership. And if you start with the partnership and the structure of the partnership and what I'm going to get out of it and what you're going to get out of it and how many times we're going to meet and who we're going to talk to, like, you're done. It's not going to work. The only partnerships that I can think of, and it was a struggle to think of ones that have been successful, is where there's a very clear externalized outcome that success is measured by. So I used to work for the city of Toronto, and I'm reluctant to give a transportation analogy right now because it's just a nightmare getting around this city. But a number of years ago, we decided that we were going to look at King Street. I don't know if you remember this. That King Street is a street where there was 60,000 people taking the streetcar every day. There was 12,000 drivers. It was just an absolute mess. And we wanted to make that street work better. And we started having conversations in the city of, like, can transportation and planning and the TTC work together to do something? And it became about governance, and it became about the fact that the heads of those departments hated each other and didn't like to be in the same room and thought that they should all be in charge, and it was not going well. And we reset it and we said, do we want people to get along this street faster? Can we agree that that is the goal, that this street is not working and the street should work better? Can we agree that that is the goal? Once you set that as an externalized goal, everything else falls away, right? It's not about you anymore. Is it working? No? Okay, then change it. If you set the metric of outcome, you see where the failures are. If the outcome is that Indigenous communities should have clean drinking water, we're failing. right? It doesn't matter what partnership structures that we have going. We're not getting there. So I think that the only way you can get a partnership to work is to be very clear about what you're trying to achieve.
Honestly, I'm getting a lot of insight from the four of you that I'm going to have to take back to my own job. So that's a really good point.
CBC is a good example of that, actually, because you guys talk about, should we use TikTok or this? But really it should be like, are we getting stories to the Canadian people?
I am not allowed to have a comment on that. We've just got a few minutes left, but I actually want to sort of close out with the point that Siri's making, and I'd like to ask each of you then, what is an outcome that you would like to see come from, and it can be from anywhere you'd like, but what's an outcome that you'd like to see come out of tech for good in the coming, let's say, 4 years? We'll start with you, Elisa.
I would like everyone to stop hoarding bloated digital assets. Every email in your inbox you don't need, every video of an uncle giving a speech at a wedding that everybody downloaded from their WhatsApp, nobody wanted, it's now in a Google Drive. 5 years from now, you will start paying $3.99 per month for extra cloud storage. But all that junk, it's replicated at least 11 times on the cloud. I've been told by AWS engineers it's going to survive an extension level event. So whatever you have anywhere on any cloud service or cloud backup, if it doesn't need to outlive you, I'm hoping we're going to delete it within the next 4 years.
I feel like in 4 years I'm going to be in the woods hiding from the zombie apocalypse and thinking about what you said, and that I wish I listened. I have teenage kids, they talk a lot right now. I don't know if you've heard the word lore. Lore is like mythology now, the story of things. And hopefully faster than 4 years, I'd like us to see lore and mythology around tech that actually had a positive impact. The idols that we have, the myths that we build around the tech sector right now are around a certain type of founder, a certain type of company, a certain type of outcome, a certain type of metric of success. And I would like us to have mythologies and legends and success stories around real positive impacts that have been made.
One thing that we developed in my previous organization was this perspective of bringing community values when we are designing technology. Not as a way to create just a diverse technology, but how we can create more ethical digital tech that doesn't embrace just profits, but embraces community. And if we bring back those community values and we bring the land and the climate as part of the technology, I think we can get a better world and better tech for good.
I would say I've seen so many amazing examples across Canada, but what I'd love to see is a lot more scaling, right? So I feel like there's just so many amazing innovations happening, but how do we scale it to impact even more people? And I would also love to see Canadians, while we do need to be slightly cautious, I feel like we usually are so cautious that our adoption rate of things like AI and other new technologies is lower than other countries. And I'd love us to still act responsibly and still look at things in the right ways, but I'd love us to be a little bit more bold in the years to come.
I actually really love how different all of those perspectives were.
What about you?
Oh.
No opinions.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to have an opinion. If someone who was like me had an opinion on this, I would actually probably echo a little bit of what you're saying, Lisa. And I think this room would be really receptive to the idea that there's a lot of talent in Canada. There's a lot of people who want and need help. And I shouldn't just say help, want and need like cool things and interesting things. And, it wouldn't hurt to see us try new things a little bit faster than we do sometimes. But, we got it pretty good here in a lot of ways, and we can improve. I want to thank all four of the panelists for joining us. I want to thank you all for listening. Oh, it's counting up. I went over time.
Thank you, yes, you, for tuning into this episode of the QueerTech podcast. Queering the tech ecosystem is a big mission, and we couldn't do it without you. This episode was produced by Lauren Hicks and mixed by Ryan Richard of Rival Digital. Very special thanks to the Canadian Media Fund for their support in making this season possible. Feeling fabulously inspired? You can help our show reach even more queering tech professionals. Subscribe to our show, give us a great rating, or write us a review. Until next time, keep queering the tech ecosystem.